If you're a real estate agent earning $200,000 a year and you want to grow your passive income, this show is for you. Learn secrets other agents use and hear from experts in our field who will guide you on your journey to investing in assets like apartment communities so you can take your commissions and turn them into cash flow. Here's your host, Randal. Let's dive in.
Jonathan, thanks so much for having me on the show. It is good going through your list of guests and seeing who you've had. And so I feel honored to be here. So thanks again for having me on.
Yeah, well, I appreciate it because I was on your podcast and then I was like, oh, I always meant like we were trying to get you right back on. And then, of course, the email happens and it's buried in there somewhere. But I'm glad we've swung it so I can return the favor because I had an enjoyable time talking to you. So let's do it again the other way.
Sure. Let's rock and roll, man.
Yeah. So let me know. I think that your first kind of aha moment for real estate started with a book. Which book was it that really got your juices flowing?
I mean, honestly, it was like so many. It was right after I graduated college. I went to work for a buddy of mine, right? And he gave me a book. He was a mortgage broker, and this is 2004.
Yeah.
But he gave me Rich Dad Poor Dad. And I had always wanted to get into real estate and didn't know exactly what aspect. Initially, it started in college and I just didn't have any money. So, but I always wanted to buy a house that all my friends could live in and we would do that thing. So anyway, when I got out and I kind of saw what he was doing, what he was working on and how he had already amassed some assets, not a bunch, but he had some toys, he had some houses, he had condo, he had some other things. But it was, Rich Dad Poor Dad, like so many other. But I think when I think about that question, it's always like that. I don't know. There's about 50 to 100 other books that I've read, that like you get the itch and then you read all these other books on like how to. It's funny because I think really now that I say that, there's a pamphlet that I got that was just like, I can't even remember the guy's name, but he came to speak at a RIA and he handed out this pamphlet and it was like how to do a rehab, and I was still trying to figure out my place, figure out what to do and where to go. And it was so cut and dry and so simple. He was like, this is what I do. And he had some, the VHS tapes that came with it. He's like, this is what I do when I walk a property. I look at this, where does the water fall? And he just walks through and did a whole walkthrough on a property. So that's probably the one that like actually shaped me the most, because that's when I was like, okay, I'm going to do rehabs. I know how to walk a property now. I know what to do. This is what I'm going to do. And that was very helpful, just seeing some of the stuff that he was doing.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's funny because I've been talking to a lot of people and what I found is that, all the ways that used to work, they still work. So that one little, very simple pamphlet, it's like, it works. You don't have to be on TikTok to make it work right now. The tried and true techniques about real estate work. Get something, add value, it's worth more. I mean, that's rehab in a nutshell. It's just whether or not you know the numbers to make it do right in a market like this, which makes it a little bit tougher. Yeah. But I've also found with Rich Dad Poor Dad, it's really a timing thing. He put it in your hands at a time where you're like ready for it. Yeah. Sometimes like I've given it to my kids when they were younger and they're like, not yet. But like now I think it's the time that it's going to really make sense and then click. Is that what happened? Like when you read it at the right time, you're like, okay, well, actually, I can actually see this happening now.
Yeah, I honestly, I just hadn't thought of things in that way. That's what the simplistic nature of that book and the storytelling and the way they wrote the book. I mean, it really is like, oh, okay. I get that's a new reality for me, which it's fairly obvious now looking back on it. But so much of it is in the timing, and I was ready to receive the knowledge that they were imparting in that book. Yeah. Thanks,
but when you were younger, though, when you were saying like, oh, I didn't have money, but I was interested in real estate. When you were like the first time that you remember thinking about, hey, real estate's pretty cool. What interested you about it in the beginning?
Honestly, not paying rent. Like in my mind, without the knowledge of how to do it, I wanted to do a live-in, what do you call it?
Live-in house hack years ago. Yeah.
And so I just didn't know how to do it. My parents weren't real estate, people. They didn't teach me any of that stuff. And so had I known that I could have gone out or gone to a RIA or gone to some of these things, this was like 2000 or so, like early days of, content or anything that was coming out on the internet. Yeah. So that's really what came down to, because I was broke in college and was like, this sucks. I don't want to pay rent. How can I figure out a way to not pay rent?
And when you get the formula for it, it actually makes a lot of sense. If you do the room hack, with college roommates, or you do a house hack, live in a tiny unit, rent the others. I mean, again, and that hasn't changed because I talked to so many people who were house hacking before that was a term. And it's like, that's just a smart way to make money.
Yeah, for sure.
And like you said, not pay rent. I'm going to leverage my rent. I'm living for free and people give me money. This seems pretty good.
Yeah. And you're growing value through the appreciation of the asset as well. So,
yeah. And especially depending on where you're buying and where you're living, that appreciation can be like a really good windfall for a lot of people.
It's very funny because I went to school in New Orleans and a buddy of mine, he still has his house. I think he's under contract right now to sell it, but he bought like a corner lot gas station. He was working at the oil company and he'd fly out to the rigs, come back, but he did the whole thing exactly how I would have done it. He house hacked this house. And so he's paid down that property and just kind of seeing how he did it. And I was like, man, that's down the street from Tulane. That's like where,
that would have been awesome.
Yeah. So it's good to see him do that. He did that again in Austin as well. And so he's got these things that everywhere he moves, he ends up buying one of these properties and doing the same thing. And so it's a great strategy.
Yeah. And I think it's very accessible. There's a lot of loan opportunities that make it, not easy, but if you're making steady income, like you can get the job done. You just have to figure out really like, are you doing value add? Are you buying something that's newer? What's your appetite for risk? And, do you have someone to help you along the way that you can trust? Because, if you think back to your first property, what was the first property that you bought finally? And then how did you know it was time to take action? Because I think that's where a lot of people get stuck.
That's a great question. So I got into mortgages in 2004. So my progression, mortgages 2004, working for my buddy who, gave me the book and he had a mortgage company. So I was doing loans. So I was like, okay, great. And getting some real estate experience, lived in Australia, trying to do some other things, and then came back in 2008. And 2008 financial crisis, I was like, should I go back to college? Should I do something to kill some time while this is happening?
Yeah.
So I got a job with an attorney here in San Antonio who was a fee attorney for title. So I was essentially I was an escrow officer doing all the escrow side of things for a lot of real estate investors. So it's just funny. The very first deal I ever bought, I had been working for this attorney. I had been on the loan side of the business. I think I was a licensed agent by this point because, I needed to get access. And the attorney had given me, he was like, you need to go out and see houses. You want to buy something? You need to walk
thank
bunch
you. That's
of properties.
what I'm telling that to people now because it's so easy to just sit behind the computer and quote, look at properties. Like you're not looking at the basement. So how do you know anything? No.
And you don't know. I mean, a picture can be manipulated so easily, especially now. And so you show up on site, you look at it and you're like, oh, well, that foundation is definitely off. I can feel it, So anyway, he had walked me through this whole process. And I think at the time we had these like the E-key where you actually had to take the little, the brick with you.
I remember. Yeah. And it like barely worked like a quarter of the time. You're like, hold it like, I don't know. Does this work? Yeah.
That thing was funny. So, but he gave me access to his before I was licensed. So anyway, I was doing all of these things. So it wasn't like I just one day went and bought this property. So the story of the first house that I ever bought, I was doing a closing for an investor. He came in this house. This is 2009. It is a $15,000 contract that I'm closing for a single family house in San Antonio. I think it was a 2-1 probably on the east side of San Antonio, 258 Bundy. We can look that up, but that never forget it. I have the check on my wall. But anyway, so the investor, the day of closing, I'm sitting there with the seller and she's so excited, she's getting rid of this house that, no one had lived in. And the buyer who I had done closings for calls me. He's like, hey man, I can't buy that house. This is just not going to happen. I was like, okay, the lady's sitting here right now.
This is uncomfortable.
Yeah. So anyway, I had, 12 grand to my name at the time. I'd been traveling, doing all these things. And I look at her and I said, look, I've been trying to buy a house. You're here. I got 10 grand. You want to sell me your house for 10 grand? She's like, okay, literally do it sight unseen, do the paperwork. Cause I'm sitting right there. Right.
That's crazy.
It was crazy. So I ended up buying that house and I had this little Suzuki, like white, neat little like car. And I've got no money and I'm driving to the east side of San Antonio to look at this house that I just bought for the first time. And there's, like bail bondsmen lining the street before you turn into the neighborhood. And then right when I turned into the neighborhood, it was kind of like a apocalypse, like now, sort of like scorched earth, sort of, like all these houses had been burned down and all they were just slabs. I was like, oh crap, I think I just bought a foundation. I think.
Yeah. Well, you knew you were buying land though. And I mean, I think the thing about real estate that's so cool is you know that you have something. You at least have the land, and then you have something on top of the land or something you can build on top of the
Correct.
land.
Yes. It would have been sketchy at best at this time in 2009 to buy just dirt. And I'll tell you why. So I go down the street, I look at it, there's a massive hole inside the house. I'm like, oh crap, what I get into? Like, I don't know anyway, I ended up selling that house. I wholesaled it for $15,000. So I got $5,000. So of my 10, it's a really good return on my investment in short order. And I was off to the races. But I'm glad it was a house, because that lady sold me the lot that she owned across the street for $1,000. So had I had just a lot, I think it would have been a tough deal. But anyway, that was the story of my first house. And to answer your question about how did I get to be comfortable doing that, it was all the reps ahead of time of going out, seeing the properties, closing a bunch of deals for other people, being on the mortgage side of the business, just understanding real estate and doing all the research and playing cash flow quadrant 1,000 times, all that stuff.
It's fun. I just did a solo episode on, I personally think analysis paralysis is fake. And part of what I was saying is because most people just don't have any reps. You don't have analysis paralysis. You're just sitting on the computer looking at things that don't have the basement, like you said. I've always said, like, to me, smell is really important. Like, if you know what cat piss smells like, you don't want to buy the house.
Yeah.
These are things people don't think about. And like, you can't see online.
Hang on. Why don't you want to buy the house?
Well, because I'm weird. I can't buy a smokehouse or a cat piss house because no matter what happens, I will always smell it. Yeah. So I can't even go to the rehab. Yeah. I just have like a weird smell thing. But if anyone doesn't, it's good for other people, but I'm a weirdo.
Yeah. We have one listed right now, and I went in there yesterday, and hopefully it'll be closed by the time this thing comes out. But yeah, there were just like animals in that place, and it was very hard to get the smell out.
Yeah.
But yeah.
It can be done. It's just that like I have a mental block on it because my smell sense is so high. Yeah. But how did you even know to wholesale the deal? I mean, because of the reps that you had, you knew like, hey, well, I have a number of options here. This doesn't look like something I want to live in. So let me trade it. I
mean, I knew one that I didn't have the capital to do that. Like I really just didn't at the time. And I didn't feel comfortable putting more money into it. And I knew that one investor was going to pay 15 for it. He must have told me at the time why he couldn't. He got tied up with something else. It wasn't like that he didn't think the house was worth it or something.
Right.
So I felt comfortable again that I could just flip the paper. And I had been to RIAs and I had been to these things. And so I knew I was like, okay, rehab, or I could sell this thing. And if I couldn't sell it, then at that point, having a house, having an asset, I felt very comfortable that I could rent it out. I could swing a hammer, I was raised with, doing some work, and I wasn't afraid of doing some work if I had to do some work. So that answers your question.
Yeah. I mean, $5,000 on a 10 grand buy, that's like pretty sweet. And that actually sounds a lot like what a lot of people have done when they started land flipping, just because of the price. Yeah. And like people are like, oh, well, you only made $5,000. It's like, but I only put in 10 grand and I sold it in 30 days. I made $5,000. Yeah. So do you want to do that? That'd be, $60,000 a year.
Yeah. And the ROI annualized is pretty darn good. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you knew you wanted to buy a house. You had the reps, but something in you knew like, hey, that was a moment. It's kind of just like on a silver platter for you. But that was all your money. Did you just feel like this probably can't go wrong? Because you knew the other investor had closed deals. They were going to pay more, like you were saying. So you're like, someone's going to take this off my hand. You're not going to be at a dead loss at 10 grand.
No. And again, like I said, had I sold it for 8, I would have had a $2,000 loss with a purchase sale under my belt. It's a win-win. Education cost me $2,000 in that scenario, right? If it was just a lot, I would have figured out what to do with it. That lot that I bought, the second deal that I did with her, she gave me, I sold it for $3,000 and I took a note on it. So I said to the buyer, give me $1,000, and I literally took his $1,000, gave it to her, and kept $2,000 in paper. So I had free money coming in. So like I had strategies and I had ideas and I had things that I could do with it. If it went wrong or sideways, right?
Yeah.
So I wasn't overly concerned with it.
Hey everybody, Randal McLeaird here with a special shout out to our friends over at Envone. If you're looking to diversify your investment portfolio, you've got to go check them out. It's envone.com. It's a crowdfunding platform with a wide range of investment opportunities, things like real estate investing and even bourbon barrel investing. So check them out. Envone hosts our crowdfund. It's actually a single-family real estate investment fund that we have launched with them, and we've had an awesome experience working with Levy and his team. They're super responsive, very quick to assist us with things that we need, and they have crowdfunding down to a science. Go ahead and check out episode 154, where Levy and I discuss crowdfunding in detail and how it can help you either invest or raise capital. And check this out. As a friend of the pod, launch your crowdfund with Envone, and you're going to get an exclusive 10% discount when you head over to envone.com/ABC, or simply call Levy and his team at 475-800-8716 and mention Agents Building Cashflow. Go crush it. Happy investing. Talk to you later.
Yeah, but that's awesome. That's because of the reps that you took going to the RIAs, getting that advice to listen, you need to get inside properties. So, people think it's so complicated. Like, I don't expect people to know like how much things cost to repair. But if you look in a basement, you know what a giant crack looks like. Yeah. It's not good. Yeah. Sometimes it's not as bad as you think. But like if it smells, like dank, it's because water's been there. Like you can figure that stuff out.
Yeah. Luckily, we don't have basements in Texas, but yeah.
I always forget. I live in a basement area. They're all like getting soaked with water.
I mean, I would love to have one. Again, I was telling you, my sister-in-law has one. We go up and it's a party. You can have, he has like video games, like it's a whole second house that you have down there.
Yeah. I mean, it's what teenagers dream of. I lived in a basement. My son lived in a basement. Like it's like before ADUs, you just hit the basement, go for the good stuff. So you knock out that first one. And then when did you buy something that you actually kept for more than just flipping it?
That same year. I mean, once I did one, I got very comfortable. And then I met a private lender immediately. So I'd never even used hard money until years later. So I met a private lender, told him that I'd just done that deal. He kind of knew my history, and I was introduced from a guy that actually worked with doing loans 2004 or 5, right?
Yeah.
So it was a warm intro, and I love Terry. You're the best, man. Honestly, he's like an old school lender where you sit down for 3 hours and talk to him, and he's just eyeballing you, asking you questions, talking to you the whole time. So anyway, I met with him, and he just gave me money. So I still have notes on 3 or 4 of those houses that I initially bought using his capital that he allowed me to wrap. So I would buy a $20,000 house, wrap it, sell it for, $70,000, $80,000, get a small down payment, and then just keep the paper. Yeah. So then I'd pay him off, and then So that year, I think I bought 2 more immediately from the MLS, $20,000 each. And then I bought, a number of other deals. And so that just kind of ticked off and then kept growing from there.
Were these all like mini renovations, lipstick flips, full flips, or did you keep any of them? Because that's like it's cool because I think this is showing people that you get the reps, you get the confidence, and then you take action. But still, you're probably not going to buy all great properties because a lot of time you get like so hopped up that you can do it that you started to think like, wow, just knock out any of these because $20,000 doesn't seem like a lot, for a house.
I've got another interview that I'm doing, and it's the like what's your best advice podcast, right? So, and it is funny because I'm like, just because you can doesn't mean you should. And but I say that. And there's a lot that goes into that, but I don't know. Those deals, to answer your question, they were $20,000 houses. The first one was a 2-1, and I went to Home Depot, picked up some guys, gave them buckets of paint, just dropped them off. I said, "Here, paint the house." Went and got more guys, took them to the second house because I closed on 2 at the exact same time. Yeah. Got more buckets of paint. Hey, paint the house. Went back to the first house. This is like 4 hours later, 5 hours maybe at the end of the day.
Yeah.
Everything was painted, like the walls, the windows, the light switches, the cabinet knobs, the doorknobs, everything was painted.
Yeah.
I swear to you. Yeah. And I was like, oh God, okay. We got to figure out how to
mess that one up.
Yeah. But yes, they were east side properties of San Antonio, which it's taken from 2009 till now. It's gentrified a bit, and it's like a lot of rehabbers went in and started flipping and building new houses and doing all kinds of things. But in 2008, 2009, it was, $15,000, $20,000 houses. And that same house, I mean, I get payments on that very first house that everything got painted on. And the guy, I mean, it's worth like 250 now. So he's got a sweet deal, and he owes, I don't know, 20 grand left, and then he's done. So
he cleaned the windows though, right? I mean, you can see how
my guys did. Yeah. We got that sorted quickly.
But that's part of the learning curve. And I think also compared to what you said for that first property, like, look, if you're buying houses for 20 grand, you can't really expect, them all to be perfect. You're going to make some mistakes, but that's your, hey, look, I'm going to learn while I'm doing it instead of just kind of surf the internet and see what people do.
Yeah. I try to think of it now. I think, so we bought one the other day. It's $100,000 house. And I think that $20,000 house is now that $100,000 house. So I think that's just where it is. And we're doing the exact same thing. We're going in 100,000, probably putting 20,000 into it and then sell it for 200. But it's an owner finance deal. We'll sell it. We'll get 20,000 down and, we'll carry that 180 note. And so there's a big delta in there, and you look at your return on your actual invested dollars, and it's a solid return. I was saying that for a reason. The $20,000 houses. Yeah. I think it's just one of those things. Like, it's hard for me knowing that I could buy houses for $20,000 back then to now give advice to anyone who's going out and starting with that strategy, because unless you have a lender who's going to let you have, a wrap on that, or you don't have all the capital yourself, then that's kind of a difficult strategy just to like kick off out the door. Yeah. Unless you have cheap money to go buy them.
Yeah, that's pretty tough to come by. I mean, I think you can have family money, but then I feel like you could let down family too. Like, there's always a string attached to it. Yeah. You're either going to be paying a lot, or you're going to be, emotionally paying a lot when you screw up the first deal and your dad lent you that 20 grand that you just, took a leak on.
Frame it properly going into that conversation. Like, hey, I may not do great, but your money is going to get paid back no matter what, right? Something like that.
Yeah. So, I mean, as you kept going, how did you upgrade your business and then, keep going to grow? Because I find that a lot of people are asking about scaling like way too quickly now. But obviously, you got to a point where you were really comfortable in trying out different types of deals, growing your portfolio, doing more active, and then figuring out what else you can do, and then growing into the business that you did at Ridgeline.
Yeah. So we went, my main strategy, the main thing to grow the capital stack that I've got was rehabbing houses. And so I got good at that. I was GCing all my projects, running those and just doing some houses. And then got to a point where we had project managers and 2 crews and that sort of stuff going on. And then when COVID hit, we shut all that stuff down. And I scaled back this direct to seller campaign that we had going for years and years and years. And it just turned into like, I'm buying now from just wholesalers or from the MLS and from other, just because I don't have to do all that front work. I'm happy to pay a little bit more for the house because it costs me that much money anyway in marketing dollars. So it's much more relaxed on that side. And then I have a GC who she runs everything and she sends her crews out. So I like right now currently am looking at bringing on somebody to just handle all the acquisitions on the front end, because that business can be standalone. I actually had a guy on the podcast the other day and he was walking me through he's got one acquisitions person who's in the Philippines or overseas, just vetting simple deals, and then a project manager. So I think I'm going to do that model because I really like that. Bring somebody in who wants to learn the business and learn what rehabbing is all about, and just let them run and say, look, if you can do, 25 deals a year, fantastic. That's kind of where we're looking to be. Yeah. I'll give you all the money for it and you run with it. And then we got into learning about funds and learning about syndications, and I'm on 250 units or something like that with multifamily. So that's kind of where we've gone to now. And I'm looking at small multis in my backyard in San Antonio, surrounding areas, so that we can go and buy some of those deals.
Yeah. And so small multis in Texas, that's an interesting conversation topic, because the bigger companies aren't buying those. So there's an opportunity there, I think, for those mid-range numbers, that are, 10 to 20 units in Texas, because there's so many 260 unit properties in Texas that you're really buying against regular buyers a lot of times. So if you have more experience, you have more leverage over them to win and know the due diligence portion of those smaller multis.
Yeah. I'm still having a hard time getting to a bid ask, if that makes sense. So that's one of the challenges that we're seeing. But still, I like that. To your point, going and buying a 250 unit complex you're going to have partners on the deal, and you're going to have a lot that goes into that, and you're competing with institutional funds that have been sitting on the sidelines for a while, waiting for a dip in the interest rates, or waiting for something to happen so that they can just deploy all the capital they've got sitting on the sidelines. So I've seen an uptick in the deal flow on multifamily. And so, hopefully soon some of these things are going to start to make a little bit more sense.
Yeah. I mean, San Antonio has been a market that's been consistently growing for years. And as a whole, Texas is still on the huge scale up, even though rents across the state are a little bit down. I think people are misconstruing what that means. There's just a lot of new construction in Texas, right? So there's a lot of inventory coming online, which will push rent down for a little while, but we need, you need the housing.
Yeah. I mean, I get varying stories, right? We've got one in Crowley, which is outside of Dallas, and then we've got one in Georgia. But the one in Crowley, the rents weren't necessarily the issue. It was competing with a new supply. And so the tenants that we had were there, but then we couldn't fill to, 97% capacity. So even with some incentives and some things that we were working on up there. So anyway, out of San Antonio, some of the guys that I know with Class A product, they are dropping the rents. They're adding a lot of incentives and that sort of thing. But some of the guys that have these 40, 50 unit properties, they're still increasing rent. They're not having any issues. So it's interesting to see the difference in those two.
Yeah, I think it's the amount of new inventory plus the old inventory. So over the grand scheme of all these potential rentals, maybe it's going down, but I don't think that the best products are going down. Yeah. And also if you're, I've had a lot of people on who do that new build construction, and they can purposefully, they engineered the construction so they know their costs, so they can go in and beat people on the rent. And they get quickly to 98%. So they're making the crushed money, but maybe their rent's a little bit under the others because they can undercut them because they vertically integrated the whole process. So they saved a lot of money that way. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, if you underwrote that way, yes. Fantastic. I know there were some guys coming out of the ground. Not that way, but yes.
Yeah. That's also specific to Texas. So, it's like in 2008, it was like, man, Texas is getting killed. And now during the, the syndication mess ups that some made, there's a decent amount of them in Texas because there's just a lot of opportunity there. So there's people who bit off more than they can chew, I think, on, debt rates and things like that weren't going to really work out for them.
A lot of free money and a lot of population growth. So helped fuel a lot of new construction, a lot of new deals, new syndicators maybe.
Yeah. Hey, it's Jonathan. On this brief interlude, I just want to remind you about something I talked about a couple of weeks ago. I'm soliciting feedback on the podcast as we're getting very close to 200 episodes, and I want to hear what you think. What you've listened to, what you've enjoyed, the guests that you feel were the best, the guests that you haven't heard yet that you would love to get on. So you can go to zenandtheartofrealestateinvesting.com/contact. Send me a message there. I'm going to read them all and I will reply directly. I would really appreciate it. Let's get back to the show. You said you had something in Georgia also. How are you figuring out when it's time to leave your general market, which is San Antonio?
That one is with some partners. And so we bought that. It was brought to me and we started looking at it, and like the market, like Atlanta, like the area out there. And luckily nothing happened in the last couple storms that went through that area. But it just, when the deal makes sense and when I can get on board with the numbers and what everything's looking like, then that's when we joined that deal. Yeah. It has not worked out great. I will say that. There was a burn building. So one of the big value adds for that project was getting the one building that was burned out, getting it back online. And that would just a huge value add right there. Never got that building built because another one burnt down. And then just the other day, got an email that somebody got murdered on the property. So it's just like all the things that can go wrong on that deal have gone wrong on that deal. Yeah. So stay tuned. I'll keep you posted on how that works out in the end. But that's the latest on that deal. Yeah, but so I think that helps. I'm like, hey, I'm going to stay in my backyard on deals that are, it's my money, and I'm going to just go on that.
Yeah, if you could dial it back to the beginning, do you think that there was a point where you should have said, no, not this one, or because it was not in your backyard? Or do you still think based on the data that you looked at, it's still a good swing?
I think had they performed better on their business plan, then no, it was a good deal. Yeah. It was a good deal. Yeah. And it for me, it's one of those, $10,000 houses, right? Yeah. I want to get into it and I want to, find some people to work with and that sort of thing on that deal. And so, no, I think I would still do it again. Learned a lot from that process working with those guys and I wouldn't change it. Luckily I didn't like rope any investors into the deal. It's all my money. So,
Yeah. So but I think, when you look at assets and when you think about what people say, don't wait to buy real estate and wait. Most assets that people get screwed up on, if they could just ride it out, if they had better debt or they didn't, undercalculate repairs, like you'd be fine in 5 years, even through like the worst cycles, you would be okay. It's the fact of leverage versus repair costs versus who you have in the deal, who wants to pull out, that can really pull the plug. If you can just ride the wave, like, if you could hold every property 10 years, you're not losing money in America. I mean, I don't know what you would have to do to lose money, but it would be almost impossible.
You ever look at deals that you sold on a flip and you see it, you're like, God, I should have just kept that thing, Yeah.
Well, so that's a really good question. And we can talk about it. So I do like a win-win, but I've had many properties where I was like, man, I crushed that when I sold it. And then they crushed it. And I'm like,
Yeah, exactly.
Man, I think we all have properties like, everyone who's ever been involved in flipping is like, I should have held more. Like I should have just held it and rented for a couple of years. I would have made another $200,000. But like, as long as I did okay, I still feel fine about it.
Yeah. Yeah. Same. I mean, I have this story of why I started looking at land and buying land, that sort of thing. And I bought 7 acres with a mobile home on it outside of San Antonio and flipped it. I think we doubled our money. And the guy that I sold it to, he subdivided it.
I knew it.
Quadrupled his money or whatever, I was like, son of a gun. Okay. That
good
can
job
happen.
by him.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, for sure. It was just great timing. And it was a corner. It had a lot of frontage, like the whole setup. Had I had my eyes open, it would have been fantastic. But again, good for him. And he opened my eyes to some things that I could, then to go do.
But I think that, that's part of, if you're in it for the long haul, like, if I held something for 2 years, sold it at break even, and then the next person made $200,000, I'd be pissed. Yeah. But most of the ones where I'm like, man, they crushed it, I also did well enough to think like, or I messed something up, so I shouldn't have made that much money. Like I had to just like, I'm just take $20,000. There was too many errors there. But I think, a lot of people do have that like, oh, that's one that I really should. I never had an emotional attachment to real estate. And it doesn't sound like you did either, because you were going to RIAs. Like everything's tradable to me, even the houses I lived in. I've moved a lot with my kids now that they're older, but they're like, I was just talking to my project manager and she just moved to a new house, and like her kid has a new room. So it's always good. I moved, my dad was a house flipper. So like the house would be awesome. And then we'd move and I'm like, I don't want to move. And then I go to the new house. I'm like, oh, this is pretty cool.
Yeah.
One day later, I didn't even think about it.
Yeah. She's comfortable in our house. I'm like, no, we got to move.
Yeah,
it's on the move.
If you're comfortable, it means somebody else likes it more than we do. When there's no inventory, I might have it. Like, and someone always says, like, it doesn't matter, what someone will pay me. I'm not moving. I'm like, nah, that's bullshit. You have a price for everything. If someone offers me $1 million to leave my house, I will leave my house. Of course, if that's a good value per price. But like, come on, like you can just buy a better house. Like, why not just do that?
Yeah. No, we're looking. It's funny. We were talking about this morning, honestly, just because our kids go to school. If our daughter goes to the same school downtown and we drive downtown, we have a lot of friends in this neighborhood. We're like, okay, if she goes there, then we're going to move. So I think I have her on the hook, and you can listen to this, babe. Maybe.
Let's see. But I think these are important points because, there's these regular home buyers who think like everything's a forever home. Of course, that's fake. You get a job transfer, you just leave, get another home. Like their houses, they feel like homes when you live in them, but you can live in a rental and it can feel like a home.
For sure.
Like you have to really understand what real estate is. It's a vehicle. I was just posting something too, and I'll get your take on it too, because I think it goes into this conversation that like, the house that you live in is always a great investment if you do it right. So the way that real estate investors are taught in like social media world is like, you got to get a duplex and then a triplex and then a sixplex. But like they forget about the houses that you can live and enjoy a house and then also crush it on the appreciation. I mean, a lot of my whole career, I just bought really nice houses that I lived in. And then I did some value add either on the front end or the back end. I think that's like an underknown asset class. Your own home is an awesome investment, especially if you make it look nice.
Yeah, for sure. It's one of those things that we kick around. We're like, okay, we need to do X, Y, and Z. And should we put it off when we're going to sell the house or do it now? We get to enjoy it. Like we should do it now. Like, let's go,
Yeah. Well, because I call it back flipping. I've a couple of times lived in the house. It was a nice house, but then I would buy another place and then move. And then I would like flip it to modern standards, do a couple more things. But then I bring my kids back or my friends are like, why? Now it looks sweet. I'm like, it looked pretty good before. Like, I just want the money. But that's a fair point. I think that's always,
like that. Yeah.
It's a good discussion to have though. Like which things like doing the kitchen, I think you get a lot of enjoyment out and it's also a huge value add, but also you don't want to do the kitchen and then stay 7 years because then you have a 7-year-old kitchen. So you really like thinking as a house flipper and somebody wants to make money on their own house, you do have to consider these things as a family. When is the right time? We don't like, I've been in houses that people are trying to sell and they're like, oh, I renovated this kitchen. I'm like, what year? They'll tell me the year. I'm like, that's 22 years ago. Yeah. Bro, that's old. It looks like old now. It's not new.
Yeah.
So that's a really interesting thing. And I just think that people discount the fact that if you're doing house hack, like you said, the first thing that you want to do, you can also enjoy that. You don't have to live in a basement unit, with 5.5-foot ceilings. You can live in a nice unit and just maybe not make as much money. Like it's okay to enjoy where you live. That's why real estate is awesome.
No. Not okay.
Yeah. No, you live in that attic unit with no air and no stove, and you just use a hot plate as an adult. Like just
you gotta do what you gotta do until you can do what you want to do. Don't you know the saying? Yeah.
Well, how has it been though? Like, everybody who has a family, we're always saying like, is the family on board? Does everybody understand that like, hey, real estate is a vehicle? And that's a really important thing for everybody. How's it been for you knowing that you can have that discussion with your wife and say like, hey, let's agree. Like at some point we're just going to move.
Yeah. I mean, I think she's on board. She's all on board. She quit her job and she was working with us and now she's full-time momming it and volunteering to all this stuff. Right. Yeah. And so, but she knows real estate and she has done her own flips and
That's awesome.
She's on board for other houses. So far, she hasn't been on board on our house. But we'll get there. But having family involved, like my brother's working for me, my wife was, and so like it's a family thing now to understand real estate and to invest in real estate and just kind of knowing that is a vehicle and a skill set that we all have now. She's on board.
Yeah. I think that's really helpful. And then it just makes everything easier when you're going about your job saying, I need to deploy capital to do this. Great. Yeah. You have a track record to show that you know what you're doing. Let's go.
She doesn't. Yeah, no, she does not care. If I stroke $150,000 check to buy a house, she's like, okay, when are you selling that? I got a new pair of shoes.
Right. Yeah, look. Yeah, you took the 150. I know it's going to come back as 250. So when is that? When I can use that? Yeah, I think that's important. So in your history, though, of flipping and renovating so many homes, where do you think people are going wrong now? Because I'm worried for new flippers now. I feel like they're, like maybe you shouldn't really be flipping now if you're brand new and you have no reps. That's kind of scary to me. What do you think?
I think it's all going to be your risk profile, right? And I highly recommend flipping over some other things. I think where people are going wrong right now are trying to wholesale and they don't know what the hell they're doing. And if you don't know what you're doing, if you've never flipped a house and you've never spent the time to understand what actually goes into rehabbing a house, then selling that product to someone else is challenging. At least for me. Like I had a call from the owner of Investor Lift the other day doing a demo call. I didn't know who he was, but he calls me and he's like, hey, you're on, I want to sell you this house. And anyway, I started drilling with questions, and he's like, "This is fantastic. I'm recording this. This is going to go live." And I was like, "Okay, cool."
Okay.
but having all these new dispo reps for wholesale companies that have never done it, and they're being promised, this is super easy. All you got to do is come in and just, do a little bit of marketing, do, pay-per-click all around the country, and then you're going to get these things. And they're overselling it. So what I'm seeing now is a lot of overpriced ARVs. They haven't priced in the fact that it's a challenge market right now, and that prices on the resale for wholesale for rehabbers are actually going down a bit.
Yeah,
at least for the ARVs and the price points that I'm working in. And they have no clue or concept if their repair numbers are accurate. So it's the same thing that's always been. But it just seems to me that is one of the things. The other thing that I think is happening right now, you got some guys who are going out, very well known, promoting, sub 2 wraps and sub 2 deals. And I've done some of those, and, we're in the process now of hopefully this guy's going to refinance and pay us off of one. But like all the legal issues you could possibly face, it is, to me, just not worth it. Like this is 2011.
Yeah. And
there was a guy out of Austin that was promoting this big thing and came down to San Antonio, and they were pitching it to us. Anyway, I went out, did the program, flyered some neighborhoods, got a bunch of deals. Literally that day was getting phone calls from people trying to get out of their houses. Anyway, some of the closest calls to problematic litigation have come from those deals.
Yeah, for sure.
And so I see a lot of people putting those out, trying to sell them, and they're selling them at like 90% because they're like, hey, it's easy to get in. Okay, well, if I'm a new guy coming in to buy one of those deals and all I got to do is put $20,000 down, but I'm in that deal for 90%, I'm never going to cash flow that thing. And, it's just with the legal issues attached to it, it just doesn't seem like it's not a great deal. It's a really good deal for the wholesaler who's putting it together. But anyway. That's what I see.
Yeah, I agree with all of that. And I think that because people think it's easy and there's kind of wholesale companies trying to train it, like you said, people think it's easy, but you're dealing with people. And the problem with the wholesalers that suck are they're not dealing with the people. They're just looking at dumb numbers, as always, low repair, high ARV. They're not even close. So then they burn their buyers list, and they're just looking for like one deal to get 10,000, and they think they're going to become a flipper on that. Now, I've always said that the best wholesalers are home buyers who are really good at marketing, who end up with overage because they're focused on the people. They're local. They understand that. Like, I think it's weird, virtual wholesaling. Like, it just doesn't make any sense to me because you're not connected to the neighborhood. Could it work? Yeah, sure. If you have the money to spend on marketing, you'll hit enough doubles where it'll work out over time. But it just doesn't seem like a very efficient strategy at all.
It depends on what efficient you're looking for. Efficient on your time commitment, it's highly efficient in that way. And you have your conversion ratio, right? It just, I don't know. A buddy of mine does it, and I was talking to him, but he was doing a lot on land, and then he had to pivot because when the rates went up and people, it just changed everything. So land isn't as good. That's what he told me. But this is 4 months ago. He told me he had $100,000 wholesale on a deal that he never saw. He just, put some paperwork together, and I was like, okay, that's fantastic. Good for you. But I got off the phone with him 20 minutes ago, and he's like, that was the last deal I did. So I don't know. I don't know that market, but it is efficient on your time, it seems like, because, but again, I just I don't know. I haven't done any of that. So I'll leave that for some other guest on your show that can talk about the merits of doing PPC.
Yeah, I think if you're a good home buyer, then flipping is a more viable option because you're limiting your mistake. And like you said, it's appetite versus risk. What are you up for? But I don't feel like people should be like, well, I'm just going to DIY this by looking on YouTube and get no permits and think they're going to sell it, which is, what the same as we're seeing kind of wholesalers not know what we're doing. We're still seeing that amount of flippers who, they're quitting in the middle or they're putting out a product and you're like,
I have seen a lot of that, man. I've
seen something. There's full renovation. I'm like, this literally looks like a house I wouldn't even buy, to lipstick flip. It's such a piece of junk. Yeah. And they just the conception of it. And look, to be honest, some of them are still selling because there's so many desperate buyers in our area. But we look at them and we're like, whoa. Yeah. Are you serious? It makes it harder for us to flip that way.
I mean, so again, if you're buying it wrong, then that's when you get in that situation, it seems like, right?
Yeah.
But my advice and the way that I always looked at it, and the reason I wanted to to rehab to sell is because then I have a product and I can control the quality of that product, right? I can myself, no matter what, control that. And so you want to make sure if you're going into a rehab that you have a quality product at the end of it, because you can rent it, you could sell it, you could keep it, you
right.
could live in it, you can whatever, and it has value. But if you have a rehab that's halfway done and you run out of money, or, it's like, you don't have a sellable product. That no one is going to buy that for what you think you could sell it for. Like, well, I paid 100 and I put 50 into it and still halfway not done. No one's going to give you 150.
No. And the classic of those are like, oh, we have it almost there for you to pick up. And then you're like, yeah, but you did it without permits and now all the walls are closed. So we have to rip all the walls out anyway, just so we can do it the right way. So you're not really helping me. You actually have to cut 25 grand off that for all of our demo and then, re-drywall.
Exactly.
And that though comes from inexperience. And like, that's where I think it's hard, because you told a great story about how you were able to take action, but I think you were getting the reps. I feel like people are generally too lazy to get actual real reps. Like, they don't say like, hey, on Saturday, I'm going to look at the 10 crappiest properties on the market. If you have a license, you have access to look at, vacant properties. You just set an appointment and you can go to open houses on dumps. They're out there. I mean, there's ways to get reps without like, overdoing yourself. But I just don't know how you're going to know anything if you're not in enough houses to really see what, you can take pictures and send them to your friends. Like, you have a contractor friend. Hey, what is this? Is this beam broken? Yeah, that's 12 grand. Oh shit, I'm not going to buy that.
Two like quick pieces of advice, right? Yeah. One, if you are wanting to rehab and you want to get into it and you want to get some reps, like go to the RIAs, find the guys who are doing the flips, and then say, hey, can I go look at the next like 5 deals with you, whatever, right? That's
or what you're working on. They love to show off their, new flip. But what do they care if you're there? Well, carry some lumber. They'll love it.
Exactly. What can I do for free? Or, even if it's not me adding some value, but it's me just being a fly on the wall, right? That's one super simple way to do it. If you're a realtor, go find some investors that you can just give them your commission and say, look, I'll list your house for free if I can just figure out what you're doing. And you're going to save 3% and blah, blah, blah. Right. And then the other one, if you're at a RIA, or even if you go to Home Depot, Lowe's, whatever it is, find a contractor who's got a ton of materials, or he's, in there, go to the pro desk and talk to them and say, who's doing a lot of business and when do they typically come in or whatever. Right. One of the pamphlet guy, very first guy that you're right. He would go to the supply warehouses at
6 a.m.
6 a.m. Yeah. And he'd have a pack of donuts and he'd have a card, or he'd whatever. And he's like, hey, what are you working on? Can I come by and take a look at your property? Or if he's trying to get a bid, he's there with a pack of donuts. Hey, 123 Main Street down the street. I need to get, a bid on it. Can you come over there real fast after you get your supplies? Super, super simple. But the whole reason you're doing all of that is it's free, and you're going to go see projects. You're going to get an idea of what that plumber or what that electrician or what that GC, and they're at RIAs too. Contractors are at RIAs. Yeah. Just go to them and say, hey man, next time you're bidding a property, can I come walk it with you? Right?
Yeah, I'll be quiet. I'll just like walk and listen to you talk. Those are great points, because I think I hear too much like, I need a mentor. Can I take you out for coffee? Like, there's nothing I'd rather do less than that. But if someone were like, hey, are you going to be at your flip tomorrow? I'm like, yeah, I'll be there. Can I just swing by and look around, and I'll ask you only 5 questions. I'll only ask you questions for 5 minutes, 5 questions. And I can just look around. Okay, I'm there anyway. And then then maybe they figure out, hey, actually I have a pickup truck. If your guy's not here, you want me to take that to the dump? Yeah. Yes. Yeah. That's a fair trade-off. It's much easier to do that because people like to talk about themselves and they like to show off what they're doing. So why wouldn't someone just want to say okay to you coming onto a flip if you're not going to be annoying? You can't sit there and ask them 100 questions, but you can just get an idea of what's going on, see the progress. I think that's really important advice, and it's a better way to navigate yourself in a RIA or in a meetup situation. Is, don't always be asking for silly things like, can I take you out for dinner? Like, definitely not. No, why would I want to spend an hour with a stranger? I'm good,
Here's a great little story from when I was, fledgling little investor at my RIA and in my little Suzuki. Yeah. It was like, I probably had like a button up on, I thought I was,
when you're talking about the Suzuki, I feel it had like a really like high pitched horn.
Meanie.
Yeah. Yeah. Like really, like you're like,
it was like, I don't even know what kind of Suzuki it was, but it was tiny, and it was new, but it was funny. Anyway, so I'm sitting here at this RIA, and I had read a book from a local guy here in San Antonio, and it was Mitch Stevens, My Life's 1,000 Houses, how he like buys all these houses, right?
Yeah.
Anyway, he's talking at the RIA, so I'm meeting all of the guys there. At the end of it, one of the well-known guys is walking out the door, and I was like, "Here's my card, man. We should catch up." And he goes, "No."
That's me. Yeah, I don't need that. That's what I would have said.
It was epic. And at the time, I was like, kind of like
what a
busted up about it.
Yeah.
And then as time went on, I was like, that guy was fantastic.
Yeah.
Like,
then we become that douchebag. And I mean, the funniest thing is that happens to me.
Nothing.
Yeah, that happens to me literally every single day on Bigger Pockets. I've been doing this my whole life, and I spend time answering questions for free. And then people, "Oh, you're being mean." I'm like, are you serious? Like, I'm just trying to help you. What do I care? You think I'm going to fly to Illinois to buy your property? It's a stupid deal. It sounds dumb, but that's a really good point, because I think like most people, they're not going to take your card. It's like, if you don't know what you're doing with postcards and you're sending them, they're all going in the garbage, you know, or if you don't have a follow-up plan, you get the one call and you're not available.
Yeah.
I'm going to wholesale, but I'm only available at 7:00 at night to take calls. Well, I think they're not going to wait for you. I think those are really good points, because I think meetups and RIAs are so important. I think they're the one thing that gets anyone who believes they're in analysis paralysis out, because you can read books, listen to podcasts, but until you see like Joe Schmo over there who's knocked out 9 deals and you're like, well, that guy's doing, he looks just like me. Like he pulled up in a Suzuki also. Like you can really see that though. You just see like,
me, buddy, let's go.
Yeah, you're like, let's honk our horns at the same time. But I think that's really the thing. Once you start meeting real life people who do deals, you don't think of them as like, oh, everybody is like, you know, driving around in like, you know, an Escalade with like, you know, a heliport on top. Like that's not how they're doing it. Yeah. Awesome, man.
There were a lot of yellow Hummers in San Antonio at those meetups.
Yeah,
I'll tell you
those shits were popular. Actually, it's funny. My stepmom had one, and we were always like, "Why do you have this? Like, it's so weird."
Run stuff over.
Oh, yeah. This is awesome, man. I'm glad I got you on here to return the favor. So if people want to get in touch with you, where's the best place for people to get in touch with you? I know your website for the company is ridgelineig.com, correct?
That's it. Yeah. And if you go on there, there's a little chat button. That's the easiest and fastest way to get to me or my team.
Yeah. Awesome, man. And kick off a little promo for your podcast as well, which I was on a long time ago.
Yeah, I know. We'll have to relink that.
Yeah, I'd love to.
That was great. So yeah, I have Agents Building Cashflow podcast, have great guests like yourself on. We talk a lot about growing cash flow over time, turning your commission into cash flow, and investing in single family, investing in syndications and funds and that sort of thing as well. So yeah, love to have the guests or the listeners, listen in on that as well.
Follow over and check it out. All right, man. Well, I really appreciate it. I'm glad we could knock out this hour and have some fun with the Suzuki. It was a great time. I appreciate the time. Man.
Good coming on. Thanks, John.
Did you know that 80% of the agents we speak with got into real estate in order to gain passive income so they could obtain financial freedom and become work optional? If you want to stay up to date, the best way is to make sure you're subscribed. So if you haven't done that, go ahead and do it now. We'll catch you on the next episode.